Hey, what's going on, everyone? We are live. I'm doing a little bit different of a setup today, so gonna just talk about how this is gonna work today and wait for some other people to join. And I'm also just going to share this on Twitter as people are joining. If you do happen to hop on, say hello in the chat. Let me know how your Monday is going so far, where you're watching from. And as a reminder, this is a Q&A, so if you have any questions at all, leave them in the chat and I'll try to get to them. Last time, I barely got to all the questions, so I will do my best to get to all of them. So if you want your question answered, I would definitely leave it in the chat sooner than later. I also have some questions that people sent to me ahead of time, as well as actually some content that I can review sort of live and share on my screen. What I kind of want these live Q&As to be very much like is kind of like how I would be doing a consulting call. So when I do consulting for clients, I'm sharing my screen, they can see my video, I've got my two monitors going, and I kind of give them live feedback. So it's not the prettiest camera setup per se, but it's more practical, I think, because I really want to get into actual content feedback and really share all the same details that I would share with anybody on an actual consulting call. So I'm just going to tweet this link one more time here, which you can now see me doing because I figured out how to share my screen. Hello, Teddy from the UK. Hope you're doing well. Just going to tweet this out here. All right, and I think what I'll do for the sake of time, since there are some questions that have already sort of been collecting ahead of time, is I'm just going to jump right into the first one. It was sent to me by Roberto. Now, Roberto actually did one of my consulting sessions last month when I donated all of the income from that to a local business here in Worcester. And then he stayed in touch with me online, and he sent me this post that he wrote, which you should all be able to see on my screen, called What is Local Marketing? And I believe he wanted maybe both feedback on the SEO side of it, but also the content side of it. So a lot of the content that people send me, through Twitter, on email, etc., some of it's just pure content they want feedback on in just a pure content way that's not related to the SEO content within it. But sometimes it is like this, where I'll give my thoughts on the SEO that's in this content, as well as the actual content itself, if that makes sense. So I believe Roberto just wanted some general feedback on this. So with all content, it really makes sense to align and define your primary goal that you want that content to achieve. Now, what do you mean by that is that goal could be, do you want search traffic? Do you want people to go crazy on social media and share it so you get a lot of attention? Are you trying to use that content to earn backlinks? Are you trying to earn PR with that content, etc.? So without knowing Roberto's goal specifically, I'm going to sort of hypothesize that maybe he's looking for rankings for what is local marketing. So he wants us to rank in Google for that. But perhaps he just wants people in the search community also to find this on Twitter, find it on Facebook, on LinkedIn, and maybe share that and spread that among their audience as well. And perhaps he ultimately wants his content to end up in front of potential clients, customers, etc., so that they might hire him for his services. As far as I know, Roberto does local SEO. So with those goals in mind, I'm going to assume that perhaps he wants to rank for what is local marketing. And so, Roberto, some feedback for you. If you wanted to rank for local marketing, you really need to begin with the actual definition of what local marketing is. What you kind of do with your post here, which I think is very clever, it could work maybe in a more social media-like environment, is it kind of starts out with a little bit of a teaser to it. Because you say, what is local marketing? Local marketing is, and then you put, wait, before I address this question, let me ask you what you think it is. And you kind of have this clever, this survey to kind of engage the readers, which I like. And then there's like a animated GIF as a meme, etc. And then you say, spoiler, that they're all correct. However, if you wanted to rank in Google for what is local marketing, I would lead with that definition as the answer. What is local marketing? Local marketing is. And then you define that. Maybe that's not your goal here. Maybe your goal really is to get people engaged, and so you want this content to do well on social media. I think perhaps with that goal, something with a little survey that's a little clever could do well like that on social media. But like I said, if you want this to rank for what is local marketing, it should definitely, begin with the answer to that question. And so I'm doing most of these content reviews very spontaneously. This is my kind of hot take on my feedback on content. The other thing is too, and that I'm going to point out to a few people that shared content for today, I would shorten the line width of your content. This is something I recommend to all of my clients when I do audits. It's a simple readability optimization, and that is to shorten the maximum length of your sentences, of your actual content, to about 75 characters. And that is because just time after time, and this is like tried and true thing, readability studies show that 75 characters is about the max length that the eye can easily sort of, track from the end of this sentence down to the beginning of the next sentence without struggling too much. And so with all content, words aside, keywords aside, rankings aside, you can instantly improve all of your content by just shortening the length of it. And that goes for anybody that might be watching. So you kind of say, what is local marketing? And then you say local marketing services, and then you talk about an audit. So I think the thing that's a little mixed up in this piece of content is your separation between informational content and transactional content. This is quite a common issue with a lot of people that create content, that they mix transactional and informational. But in the days of the recent core updates, I think your clarity on exactly, intentionally, how much of your content is informational versus transactional is very, very important. I could talk probably the entire video about this, which I won't, but it's very important to define, is my piece of content informational and then provide that information, or am I selling a product or service in this content? Because Google is looking at, I think, the degree to which your content is informational or transactional. It also creates a lot of friction for the reader or the user, because when I landed on your article, Roberto, I thought this was going to be sort of purely informational content, defining local marketing, talking about what it is, maybe setting up some strategies. And I got this clever quiz, and I'm like, okay, maybe it's going to start, the information is going to start below that. But then it immediately shifts and starts talking about services. And that is something that's disorienting to the reader. And it's also, like I said, something that's going to confuse Google. And Google's really looking for clarity of informational versus transactional. Now, it's not that you can't have transactional service or product content in informational content, but you have to be very deliberate and careful about where you put that within the structure. And my sort of overall tip here is to, in a case like this, when you're setting up content as being informational, make sure that that information is mostly at the top, and then at the bottom of your content, that's where you may think about shifting towards talking about your services and how you can help. My advice is, what you really want to do is really hook the reader with a lot of juicy, relevant, helpful informational content. Pack that post with all the informational content, so by the time they get to the bottom, they're really bought into your information, your personality perhaps, your philosophy. And by the time they get to the bottom, they're so sold on what you're talking about, and they feel like you've been so helpful, that then you can shift towards talking about your services. So that's what I'd recommend. And the other thing too is just with any general what is a topic piece of content, I would think about trying to structure this content a little bit better as well. I think that you can start in with the, like I said, what is topic, and then typically you would want to flow from that into why is this important. So you might want to talk about, why is local marketing important? you kind of jump right away to, is local SEO part of local marketing? So that's a much more nuanced, specific thing. So I think I would try to bring a little bit more structure and clarity to this content as well, as far as how the topics are flowing. So start with what is, then maybe go into the general benefits, why it's important. And then if you want to pivot towards local SEO specifically, I would make that very clear and say, something like, what is local SEO as it fits into local marketing? Like really make that clear that you're diving into a subtopic of local marketing. So I want to move on to get to some of the other content that people have said, have submitted, and get to some more feedback. But Roberto, I hope that helps you out. And everybody check out his site, turum.co. Like I said, Roberto connected with me on a consulting call where I donated all the fees to a local business, and he does local SEO. Hey, Aaron, good to see you in the chat. Thanks for giving me feedback on that first answer. Okay, so like I said, I figured out how to share my screen. I'm giving some feedback on content that people have sent me ahead of time and questions people have sent ahead of time. If you want to get your question in, definitely leave it in the chat sooner than later. I do see a question in there already, which I will get to in a little while. But first, I'm going to get to some of the questions that people asked me ahead of time. The second question comes from Chris, who sent this basically another piece of content. So this content is about the SEO world. So I'm going to give my thoughts on the actual SEO content within this article, but then just how good it is as content in general. When I give this content feedback, I'm going to try to not hold anything back. I'm going to be very, very, I'll be nice about it, of course, but I want to be very honest and blunt and direct with my feedback. So if you do send content, just expect that I will, be as blunt as possible. So I believe Chris just sent this wanting feedback maybe on the ranking study. This is similar to maybe some other ranking studies that have come out lately. The first thing that really jumps out here for me is that you could have a better title. I think just calling it SEO Data Science, a study of 112,000 personal injury law firms, that to me is sort of just plainly saying what the article is, but there's nothing really interesting about that. So I would reconsider your title here and think a little bit more like a journalist or a news publication, and just follow that, very tried and true philosophy of not burying the lead. So rather than put what this is, maybe hint at a little more specifically what the result, the overall takeaway was, the overall benefit that you might receive from reading this article. When I see the headline and I just see SEO Data Science, a study of 112 personal injury law firms, I have no idea what I'm going to get from this piece of content. So I would rework the title to make it, like I said, sort of tease the findings a little bit more and make it so it's essentially a little bit more click-worthy. I do think you kind of lead into it a little bit nicely because you talk about how you've been doing this for 7 years, you've been getting results. This is something that I do want to point out. I want everybody, when you're creating content or editing content or reviewing your client's content, to think very carefully about the topic categorization of your first sentence. And what I mean by that is I would categorize this first sentence as a service statement. You're making a statement about your SEO, your law SEO services. So that already skews the topic away a little bit from, this is primarily a study of 112,000 personal injury law firms on SEO. So if you're trying to rank this in Google for maybe like you have in the URL here, personal injury SEO or SEO data science or something like that, the statement of the first sentence should be about your main topic. Now again, that's for SEO purposes. If your primary reason of creating this content and primary audience and distribution channel is more like social media, that is where the first sentence can go a little bit astray topically. But like I said, if you are trying to rank this for something in SEO, I would try to make the categorization, the sort of sentence type at the beginning, more on topic. You do kind of set up, the value of this sort of study, which is good. You talk about you're evaluating 112,000 SERPs, etc. The thing that I think could be added to this was I want an idea of what these keywords were, because you kind of go into talking about the summary of your findings. And there's a summary, and then one of the first major takeaways here is law firm directories have a notable advantage. But my really main question is, and all questions in SEO really need to begin with, what is the keyword? What is the search query space we're talking about here? Because your findings, to me, don't really mean a whole lot unless I know an example of some of the search queries. And the other thing is, too, here is if you're studying 112,000 search results, that's going to be a wildly different set of types of search queries, from local to non-local to certain types of intent, whether it be service or informational, to people asking questions versus keywords, etc. And so I do find it tricky to state a blanket takeaway without knowing at least an idea of the types of search queries that these takeaways are based upon. Like I said, I didn't read all of these word for word, but I am scanning the content and I don't immediately see sort of a call out or indication as far as, okay, so there's an example here. So maybe these are just the general, injury lawyer Sacramento. So maybe it's lawyer type plus location search queries. So if that's the case, I would put that information a little bit higher in this content because, like I said, it's not super clear what the actual types of search queries are. You do get down to it below, but I would like to have the content sort of set up first from that perspective. So there may be a couple little pauses here in this live Q&A as I'm sort of taking in the content. I am sharing my screen, which hopefully you all can see. If for some reason you can't, let me know in the chat, but I am seeing it here in the preview. So I want to give you all a chance as well to kind of scan and see the content as I'm seeing it. And I'm also going to put the link to this content that I'm looking at in the chat in case anybody wants to open that up and take a look as well. But again, I'm just kind of giving some live feedback on content from an SEO perspective, but also from a general content perspective as well. Another thing you could do, like I mentioned to Roberto, the first person, is shorten the line width of your content here. It's very, very hard in eye tracking studies show that it is very hard to, easily read a very long sentence. So I would definitely try to shorten that as well. So just going to scan this again a little bit more. The other thing too is, I'd be careful about where you put video content structurally in the page. I find this here, the video here, I think a better way to set up the video would be to put that all the way down at the bottom. This type of content can primarily and usually is most easily consumed in text format. So I do sort of feel like the video here kind of distracts from the main content a little bit and just pushes your actual findings down a little bit. So I would maybe create a specific call out to the video at the bottom and just move that down below. Optimize metadata. So I'll move on to the next piece of content. I don't have time to do, a completely thorough deep dive on all of the content that people send to me because I'm trying to fit everything into about a 45-minute or hour Q&A. I think lastly, for all of these ranking sort of data science studies, is I would put a huge caveat, as we've all seen when Backlinko released his latest ranking study. There's a lot of pushback in the SEO community about people understanding the difference between causation and correlation. A lot of pushback as to how helpful these ranking studies actually are. So I would just clearly put a disclaimer at the top of this, just reminding people to understand the difference between the correlation study you have here and the causations when it comes to ranking factors. I think if this is content that you're trying to get out in the SEO world, get in front of other SEO practitioners, etc., you're going to want that disclaimer there. Otherwise, you will probably get some more pushback, maybe some more negative comments than you would have if you didn't put, a clear disclaimer like that. Just looking at some other takeaways here. Yeah, I think the findings are kind of interesting. But in general, for me, all SEO comes down to how well when I think about law SEO, in one sense, law SEO is a completely different animal than most other SEO. It's very competitive. It has a strong, of course, local component. There's a lot of law practices and law SEO that's done very gray hat and black hat. It's just very, very competitive. The ads are extremely expensive as well. So it's a completely different way of doing SEO than most other types of SEO, even other local SEO scenarios. So with any type of SEO situation, with that said, with all the differences there are in law SEO, the unifying factor about law SEO and all other SEO, despite the differences, is how well have you researched, defined, and aligned your target keywords with your actual pages on your site. Because I think that's where a lot of these correlating factors come in, right? Like it says higher word count. Well, maybe folks that create content with higher word count are also more likely to have done your keyword research, maybe optimize other areas of the content, maybe build links to it. So in other words, maybe just longer word count correlates to more SEO, more proactive SEO activity, whether it's white hat, gray hat, or black hat link building. Maybe higher word count just happens to, as a byproduct, add more keywords into your page. It doesn't necessarily make your content better. And to me, word count is definitely not a ranking factor. So, I think that's a caveat. That's one sort of caveat I would address with a piece of content like this, is to, take extra care to state that word count is not a ranking factor. And I do think, like I said, word count correlates to other things that people are doing with SEO. So I'm going to move on and I'm going to go to the chat. And MT, who was in the this live Q&A 2 weeks ago, hello again, MT, thank you for joining us again, wants a detailed knowledge of backlinks. So there's a lot of really great resources out there that are really detailed about backlinks. And even though there's some questionable validity or usefulness to Backlinko's ranking factor studies, I do think I would take a look at some of his backlink content. And if anybody else watching has any other good backlink resources, you could certainly add those in the chat. Honestly, MT, if you want some good detailed knowledge of backlinks, I would go to Bill Slosky's content where he analyzes Google patents. And a lot of those patents have to do with backlinks. So I would definitely read the original PageRank patent from Google and read Bill's summary of that, and go ahead and look through all the other Google patents that Bill has written about that talk about backlinks in any way. I do think going to that source is a really good starting point if you want detailed knowledge of backlinks. Keep in mind that all patents, just because a patent exists does not mean that it's necessarily being used by Google. Maybe it was used at one point and it's not used anymore. Maybe it has been granted, but it has not been used yet. Maybe it's been filed, but it hasn't been granted, etc. So you just want to keep that in mind when you're reading patents. But yeah, for detailed backlink knowledge, I would definitely look to Bill's writing and then the Google patents themselves. So, like I said, I've got some more content I'm going to share some live spontaneous feedback on. As well as another couple questions that people sent to me. So if you are watching live and you have any questions at all and you want me to get to them, definitely leave them in the chat, and I will get to as many as I possibly can. And also, if you're watching and you want to say hello in the chat, just say hello and let me know where you're watching this from. We've already got Teddy from the UK. Aaron, I actually don't know where you're based. I think it's somewhere in the middle of the United States. But if you want to give me a shout and let me know where you're at, let me know. And MT, if you want to give me a shout and let me know where you are watching this from as well, that'd be great. So I'm going to go to a question that somebody sent to me a little while ago, actually about running and building an SEO agency. And so this question here from Richard. Richard says he really admires everything I've been able to accomplish. I appreciate that. And trying to branch out in his own agency, get it off the ground, and would be grateful for any advice about maybe building or growing an agency. So we could tackle this from several perspectives. I think number one, when you're starting an agency, there's always going to be an element of you're going to have maybe an idea of where you want it to go, but there's always going to be a degree of an unknown. And I think this is the case for any type of business situation that you embark upon. So you need to, have a plan, have a path, have some goals sort of laid out, but be willing to embrace things in an unexpected way. Be willing to embrace maybe a path that you didn't really perceive or count on to begin with. So that's the first thing, right? Is just having that overall mindset that, you're going to have a certain path in mind, but be ready to deviate from that path. And so that's kind of like just a mindset thing. Second from that, and one thing that's been very useful to me is to really, try to learn about yourself and your strengths. Because when you're starting and or running an agency, that agency is just going to be a reflection of you. It's going to be kind of like a fingerprint of your quirks, your strengths, your weaknesses, your preferences, etc. And so for me, I thought that I wanted to go on this path of having a bigger agency with employees. In fact, we had a full-time employee for about 18 months. But through that experience, I realized that certain path was not for me. Oh, Aaron, you're in Indianapolis. Hello from Indianapolis. And so you really need to reverse engineer and self-diagnose what your strengths and weaknesses are. And so for me, after having a full-time employee for 18 months, what I really realized is my strength area and my interest area was to stay more focused on just directly working with clients on a very one-to-one basis, almost like a trainer/consultant. And that's my strength. That's where my sort of interest level is. What I'd recommend everybody is taking the Strength Finders test and reading the book. A lot of those personality tests, I think, are sort of like, pseudo astrology level types of things, the Myers-Briggs, etc. They're a little more fun, I think, than they are practical. But I did find the Strength Finders test to be extremely practical and helpful for me in not only running an agency, but also just sort of business and life in general. Because where it pointed to me was that I like to sort of, my strengths lie in being a communicator, being an ideator, strategizing, and working directly with clients. So you should map out what your strengths and weaknesses are, no matter where you are on your path setting up an SEO agency. But second, though, and more specific to the SEO world and marketing in general, and this can apply for anybody watching, whether you are in an agency or you're doing SEO for, a company in-house or anything involving like doing SEO. And that is, as you're setting up your agency, be very aware of the fact that, the SEO space is very, very highly competitive now. There are a lot of SEO agencies, so you're really going to need to find a way to set yourself apart as an SEO provider, as an SEO agency. This could be in a number of ways. Number one, you could set yourself apart as an SEO agency by having a very niche specific service that you do. For example, when I think about app SEO, I always think about Justin Briggs and his company, Brigsby, because he spent a year or two delivering talks and creating content about App Store SEO. Now, that's not all they do, but that was like one niche within SEO that they were able to talk about that really made them stand out and probably attracted that very small sliver of companies looking for maybe App Store SEO, but of course would get people into learning about all the SEO services that they provide. So that'd be number one, is to really identify a niche for yourself Now, it doesn't mean you have to make yourself an App Store SEO company, but what I think that means is you could be an SEO agency, but then the content you create, the talks you give, the social media posts that you do will be very focused on this one particular niche. So for myself, 3 or 4 years ago when I started my SEO podcast, there were less SEO podcasts out then, and because I've been consistent with it and tried to keep it at a very high quality, that is one thing that has helped me stand out as an SEO provider, is because people kind of go, oh, hey, there's that guy Dan with the SEO podcast. So you can make yourself stand out in other ways as well. Like, I think branding is a very great way to make yourself stand out. There's an SEO company I was aware of years ago down in New Jersey, and the owner's last name, I believe, or I think her name is like Pam Ann, which sounds like Pan Am, which is the airline. And they created this whole set of branding around, like flight and the airline space, and a play on words with her name versus the airline name. And I always thought that really flowed into some really great branding. Everything from, the visuals on the website, to their logo, to their content, to like everything they do, they kind of give this spin to. So when you're starting an SEO agency in the current climate of SEO, it's very important to make sure that you stand out. And then finally, if you're just beginning an agency and you're small, I would highly recommend, and even if you grow to a bigger agency, really digging into personal branding. Whenever I've received the best SEO inquiries or clients, etc., ironically, it doesn't come from people Googling SEO agency, like in a generic way. What it comes from is great personal branding. And I know that not everybody out there wants to be like a thought leader or wants to be Twitter famous, and that's not even my goal in the reason why I sort of provide information to people and kind of put myself out there. So you can develop a personal brand, but in a much less Twitter famous sort of way, by posting really good content on LinkedIn, or being a guest on podcasts. Like, you don't even have to show your face in a podcast per se. But what you're really doing is letting people connect with you on a personal level, and then you can also additionally really put your philosophy about SEO out there, which I think is very important, because again, in the SEO space, a lot of people on the outside of SEO view us SEO folks as, snake oil salesmen, or sort of a dime a dozen. I've had a lot of companies kind of like refer to the SEO person as like, oh, just the SEO guy, etc. Which of course, they should be saying girl and guy, of course. But, there's this sort of like stigma that a lot of people outside of SEO put on people that provide SEO or the SEO world. So you really need to work against that. And, one thing that I've done is I've had clients tell me like, we liked you as an SEO provider because you're nice, which I think is a very interesting thing, because their experience with a lot of SEOs in the past is that they might ask them a question, and that SEO might respond in sort of a snarky or condescending way, or a way that makes them feel like it was a dumb question. So you can set yourself out apart from people just by simply being nicer, and you can achieve that by like I said, leaning into the personal branding side when you are sort of developing an agency. So I hope that helps. I could go a lot more into tips on starting and or growing an SEO agency. For anybody joining, the context of that was somebody was just asking me about tips about growing and branching out into doing your own thing as an SEO agency. I think one last thing I would add there in terms of like getting your own clients, because that's always a big question a lot of people ask, is how do I get SEO clients? When I started out, I got my first few clients by interacting actually in piano teaching forums, because prior to doing SEO, I was a musician and piano teacher, and I offered a music school to do, at first, a little bit of free SEO for them in exchange for testimonials and being able to sort of leverage that as a case study. So I do believe when you're first starting that in certain contexts and certain situations, it's okay to offer a little bit of free work, but never offer that without them agreeing up front to what you're going to get in exchange for that. Because, although they might not be paying you, you should always indicate and state a value in what you're doing, even if that value is for you a way to get some testimonials and some case studies so then you can grow your agency and expand that to getting more clients. Another great way when you're starting out that I was able to get clients was interacting in the SEO forums directly, not offering free work, but actually just offering, really good answers to questions. So I had a very long-term client called healthyhearing.com. They were my client for like 5 years, I think from like 2011 to 2017-ish or something like that. They originally found me because I was answering questions in the Moz Q&A. Hey Aaron, yeah, thanks man. Good to see you, and thanks for joining in. I appreciate you tuning in for a little while. That client of mine for 5 years found me because I answered a question of theirs in the Moz Q&A, and then reached out that way. So if you are beginning an agency or stepping out to doing SEO on your own, getting out there and answering questions, even leaving blog comments, believe it or not, can still be a good way to get the awareness and attention of people that could be a good client for you. So for anybody joining, I had some questions ahead of time and some things, some content people sent me that I'm giving some live feedback on. But if you're watching and you have any questions at all that you want me to answer, leave them in the chat sooner than later to make sure that I get to them. Because I think I will just have time for some of the questions that people sent based upon content, and then maybe another question or two from the live chat. And also, if you're joining, let me know where you are joining from. And also, if you missed my little spiel at the beginning, I've played around with these live Q&A setups a little bit, but I think what I've landed on here is doing it very much like I would do an actual consulting call, where I have my screen going, I'm sharing that, so that gives you the ability to send me actual content that you want feedback on. So even outside of these Q&As, tons of people will send me their content that they want me to look at, whether that's SEO content that ultimately they want me to share, or just feedback on content in general. So if there's SEO content or content that you want feedback on, and you want people in the SEO space, if you want some extra eyes on it, definitely feel free to send that to me, because now I'm sort of sharing that in the live Q&A, and anybody watching this Q&A live or after is going to see your content. So it might be a great way to also get a little bit of extra exposure to it. I am going to be very frank in my feedback on people's content. Okay, so somebody, I believe, tweeted this to me, asking for feedback on this article about the point of the May 2020 Google Core Update. And so most of this feedback is going to be fairly spontaneous. So I'm just going to scan it very quickly here, try to take in the basic headings, etc. I think any content that's feedback on the core update in general, it really needs to be either a very large data study or a very deep dive into specific site evaluations. I might be going a little bit on a rant here, but what I'm seeing a lot of in the SEO space is these like studies of the core updates, which looks at winners, so-called winners and losers. And I'm going to say some things that go against even things that friends and colleagues of mine in the SEO space talk about and write about. I don't think you can look at core updates and evaluate them as having winners or losers. In my opinion, Google is not penalizing or targeting domains when it comes to core updates. It can look like a website lost or gained from a core update, but that's just because maybe a particular domain or website lost rankings on some keywords more than it gained rankings on some other keywords. So all of the tools and I forget all the names, like SERP metrics, etc., that publish winners and losers, I think that's good to be aware of, but to me there are not a domain-wide winner or loser from a core update. What's really happening, I believe, is Google is updating certain query spaces, certain intent types, certain categories of content, and thus it looks like some domains are winning or losing, but when in fact any specific domain or analysis I've done at this point, probably over 100 websites across all the core updates, they never clearly just lose. Like, it's never like a penguin update where Google targets a website and deranks the entire thing because it has bad backlinks. Or it's not like a Panda update where Google looks at an entire domain and just deranks the entire thing because it has all low quality content. The core updates are much more nuanced and specific than that. So getting back to my feedback on this core update article, I think if you're going to publish anything about core updates, like I said, it should be huge data, like a huge data study. But what I'd really love to see is deep dive studies into, hey, we took this one domain, we're going to lift the curtain a little bit and go into a deep dive and literally segment out what pages lost or gained traffic, because it's never all lost or never all won. Any website I've looked at in a core update, some pages win, some pages lose. Or what certain query types or query spaces won or lost. So in general, from these, I would love to see much more deep dives. Like, you don't have to reveal the exact website, but you could say this is a website in the, automotive industry or health industry or software industry or whatever it is, and say these are our specific findings in the core updates. This is the query space. These are the rankings that went up and down, etc. I don't think it's worth doing any core update without segmenting your page types or your keyword types. If you're just analyzing core updates from just traffic without any segmentation, I think your analysis is kind of pointless at that point. Okay, so it looks to me like this article is just kind of a roundup of maybe things that this particular writer or website has read about on other SEO studies. So, to be totally honest, like, I think this might be a good summary for, like, you could create a very overview summary like this if your purpose of this is to give it to maybe small business owners or just business owners or even VPs of marketing, etc., that don't have the time to read all the details and nuances about core updates on their own, but they just want a Reader's Digest version of the Google core updates. So this format could work well if it's not for SEO practitioners or people that are more in the SEO space, but if it's for people that just want to get caught up on what the core update is all about. The problem with this, though, is that a lot of this information seems like it might be taken from other sources that have done studies that I believe shouldn't be taken at face value and might have flaws to them. And I think all these things are generally decent pieces of advice. Like, all your websites should have a good user experience. They should all have good content quality. They should all, EAT's another thing which I'll get into. I don't think EAT is a part of the algorithm or core updates in the way it's talked about in the Quality Raters guidelines. All websites should not have disruptive advertising. That, to me, goes all the way back to something Glenn Gabe wrote about very well in what he coined was the Phantom update. Back in like 2017, I think it was. And all websites should have good technical SEO. So, I think an article like this, like I said, the format could be good for anybody that's not an SEO practitioner, but I would work really, really hard to get something a little more detailed or specific, about the core update. These things are going to come across just as, things that are overall best practices that everybody could mention, and there's not a lot of meat to it. So I would definitely try to rework it from that perspective. So there's a couple questions in the chat, so I'm going to just quickly give some feedback on this last piece of content and then get to the questions in the chat. So thank you, Teddy, for asking that, and hey, Andrew, how's it going? Or Kiv here. So KYIV. I'm not sure how to say that, but your chat name says Andrew. So whatever your name is, hello, thank you for joining. So here's another piece of content somebody emailed to me. They wanted feedback on it about the May 2020 core algorithm update, a different perspective to SEO. So this looks like a little bit of a news perspective. Google rose out. Yeah, so again, my very quick hot take on this is I don't see a lot of substance here. Google rose. It's just sort of restating things that Google has said. It would be Yeah, what I'd really love to see from people writing about the core update is somebody that has actually analyzed, even if it's just one website, and written about some more specific findings that you have found. So these sort of like just broad overviews, like I said, they could be good for a summary standpoint, but there's not a lot being said in this article. So even if your goal is to get people to share this piece of content, my question to you would be, who do you want to get excited about this content and share it? Because I don't think actual SEO practitioners are going to be excited about this content. And I don't even know that people beyond SEO space, beyond SEO practitioners, are going to be excited for this content either. So, if you want to do just something that's short and sweet, again, I would dive into a very specific, even like, let's have somebody analyze one keyword, right? Where is the pieces of content where somebody has found one keyword where they've had a website really suffer from a core update? And give us your 800-word thoughts on your analysis of that one keyword ranking. That would be so much more valuable than another sort of regurgitated, summarized version of what everybody else or Google is saying about the core update. So for anybody wanting really good core update content ideas, let's have somebody publish something that's analyzing one keyword. Or if not one keyword, if it's one website or one piece of content. I think that'd be far more valuable. Again, my take on the core updates is, people are analyzing these at a domain-wide level and an overall traffic level, but not looking at the actual nuances and details. And that is, with core updates, it's not about domains being punished or rewarded. It's about specific queries, specific query spaces, and specific pieces of content. If a website happens to, gain more traffic from some search queries and lost on others, it looks like they're a winner, but Google is not rewarding or penalizing actual domains. So in my opinion, on a core update, Google is not going, we're going to go out and target medical websites in this core update. They are recalculating their understanding of search intent, of content relevance, of content quality. I believe Google is getting very good and sophisticated with machine learning and natural language processing at actually analyzing the text on a page that's giving them a better understanding of they're not looking for, is the author name on this piece of content and does it link to their credibility. What I believe Google is looking for is actually how well is the content written, and they're looking at that just by analyzing the actual words and text. So if you were to pull everything out of the web page except for just the text, right? Like if I go to this piece of content and I turn on my web developer plugin here and disable all styles, right? And I just look at just the text, which is taking me a while because there's a lot of CSS and stuff here at the top, a lot of spacing. But okay, that's a problem with this website. You can't see the actual, there's the content there. Okay, so if you were to just take the words, how would Google analyze? How well are these words constructed, put together? How well do you indicate by the words that you're using, by the structure of your sentences, by the topical flow, by the structure of the content? How well are you proving that you're an expert at this piece of content? I don't think Google is using, author, analysis to do that, or Better Business Bureau ratings or anything like that. They might be using links, of course, and backlinks for a measure of authority. But I think they're actually just analyzing the text. So with all my clients, I make recommendations for them for how to improve their text to just literally make their content better. You could look at things like, am I topically complete? I'm not mentioning all the topics and subtopics, etc., that a reader in Google would expect to see in a piece of content like this. Am I being concise with my words? Throw the content into Hemingway app. Make sure there's no run-on sentences, no passive voice, no hard-to-read sentences, etc. Just make your content better and easier to read. So that's kind of my soapbox about core updates. I could go a lot more into that, but I have a very different take and perspective on them than a lot of what you're seeing out there in the SEO world. I think it makes no sense at all any longer to analyze, if there's winners or losers, or to try to come up with, parallels between, what was Google targeting in this core update versus the other. I think the only thing that's practical that you can do in a core update is actually go into your Search Console and segment where you gained or lost traffic from keywords and pages, and try to then find what's unifying for you about your site on that. For example, I was analyzing a site that lost some traffic on a core content update, and we kind of realized the main theme for them was they were losing traffic on pages where they weren't clear enough about their transactional versus informational content, and they weren't aligning the keywords properly to that intent. So if you have category pages on an e-commerce website that you are trying to rank for product intent searches, but you're putting too much informational content on the page, and that informational content is too high up on the page, or there's just too much of it, that's going to skew Google's understanding and interpretation of the intent of that piece of content. Google's going to look at that content more as informational based rather than service or product and transactional based. So you really need to make sure that you're structuring your content to fit the basic intent of transactional or informational. Okay, so with that said, there's a couple questions in the chat, at least one that I'm going to get to, from Teddy. And Teddy wants to know, will URLs listed under excluded in Search Console eventually be removed from Search Console? Someone had their WordPress website hacked, and there are quite a few URLs with looks like maybe junky or spammy parameters in them. I do believe they're going to go away eventually. The other thing I noticed lately is Google is redoing how you're going to be able to tag and manage URLs in the reports. So like in the old webmaster tools, your 404 errors, right? You could go in there and you could actually check them off as being fixed, and they would go away, right? They'd be removed from the report. So the thing about these reports are, they're just kind of a pain, really, when there's like URLs in there that you know about and you don't want in there. They're just kind of muddying up the reports for you. I do think they're going to go away eventually. And this would honestly be a question where if you ping John Mueller or Gary Ish, maybe even Martin Split on Twitter, they'd probably be able to answer that for you. I don't go into those reports enough to know for sure if they go away, but my assumption is that they do go away. Especially like you're saying, if the site is now cleaned up. So yeah, I think they're going to go away. I think they're just going to be more of a nuisance in the meantime. But like I said, I'd keep your eyes open for the new tool or whatnot of the way that Google is going to allow you to manage all of those URLs in the various reports. So yeah, great question. But in general, it's not going to harm your SEO to have the URLs in there. Like, it's not indicative that there's still a problem. It's just a delay in them cleaning up your reports. So great question though. So we've got just a couple minutes left. If anybody else has questions, definitely leave them in the chat. I'd also love to know, my intent here by reviewing content, putting on the screen, was that I feel like this is a really good way to get hands-on and give everybody value by sharing what my feedback would be on content. I'd love to know in the chat or on Twitter or in the comments if you thought that was cool, if you thought that was valuable. I could dig into that stuff more. I could have people submit content and review it live. We could dig into if people want to send me keywords, I could go through, what I'm seeing as far as ranking issues with certain keywords. Of course, everything would have to be done publicly. So if you send a keyword, if you send your site, you have to be willing to let others, see that as well. But I feel like it might be a good way to add some value to these Q&As because I don't know of many other people doing that. So if if I've got your thumbs up and you want more of that and you want to submit content, let me know. If you'd rather me just shut the screen off and just talk directly to the camera and answer your questions directly, let me know that too. My goal here is to make these chats really valuable for people. It's my way to provide some free advice every other week because people do message me with questions, they email me with questions, and I can't really always answer those because I don't always have the time to get to all of them, but I feel like kind of collecting them and doing them in a Q&A here is a good way to get some answers to those and provide value to other people that might have similar questions. So that's kind of everything. I know we only have a few minutes left, so if you do have a last question, leave it in the chat. If not, I've been doing these every 2 weeks, so you can always send me a tweet or I was going to say email, but really Twitter's better if you want to get a question to me for me to answer these on the next Q&A. And ultimately, my goal with these Q&As is to actually take some live calls, because I think, me just talking here alone can only be interesting and only go so far. The more people that are kind of joining and asking questions, when that kind of like builds to a certain point, then I'd love to start taking some actually live questions where I can get people on the phone so you can hear the voice and I can actually have a discussion and a little bit of a back and forth. Teddy, I'm glad you like the format. You can definitely email me. I do get a lot of email. Twitter's usually sometimes the better way, but email is fine too. So Twitter, it's at DAN_SHURE. The email is dan@evolvingseo.com. If you email me a question, I'm collecting all of it in a note doc. If I don't reply to your email, it doesn't mean that I'm not going to get to your question. It just means I get a lot of email and I can't reply to everything. But if you email it to me, I will definitely try to get it onto the next Q&A. So Teddy, thank you for the feedback and for planning on emailing a question. So like I said, I would love to do actually live call-in at some point. So if that's of interest, let me know. I can maybe set that up for 2 weeks from now. But again, I really just want to help people out, especially during COVID, especially when there's a lot of people, trying to navigate stuff. So if you do have like COVID specific SEO questions, you can let me know of that as well. These have been a lot of fun so far. So thank you for everyone joining in. And I also hope you don't mind my sort of quarantine haircut that I've been sporting for the last few days here. We just sort of heard ahead of time that in Massachusetts we might be able to get haircuts soon here. So this might go away in a few weeks, but we'll see what happens in the world of haircuts here in Massachusetts. So I think I'm going to leave things there. Thanks again for everybody joining. This has been super fun. I really appreciate you joining in and saying hello, asking your questions. Please share the link and the fact with people that might find value and help from these Q&As. Please feel free to share that with them and submit your questions to me throughout the next 2 weeks. And I'm going to sign off here. Thanks everyone again, and I'll see you in 2 weeks. Take care.